So when we're highly emotional, when we escalate our emotions, we take our impressions and we fuse them with reality. We treat them as if they're facts. Like, this guy is a jerk. It's like Korzybski called it the is of identity, right? Not just, this guy seems like a jerk to me. This guy is a jerk, as if it's an objective fact, as if I expect everyone else to agree with me about it, right? Once I make that transition, that's synkatothesis. Like, once I fuse my perception with reality, I'm kind of now inhabiting the impression. I'm trapped inside it. That's become my world. Now, I'm living in a world where there's a guy in front of me that's a jerk and he deserves to be punched. So it's almost now I'm inevitably going to experience the escalation of the emotion. The Stoics want us to kind of introduce a pause at that point before that happens, to catch it early and say, hang on a minute, hold your horses. Like, this is just an impression. It's not the whole story. It's never the whole story. And maybe it's distorting things or exaggerating things in certain regards. Normally that happens. I'll explain a very simple way of understanding this kind of two-phase model, which is weirdly consistent with modern research on emotions. So hopefully already you can see how this is a more sophisticated understanding of emotion that changes the coping strategies that you would potentially use. Like, how could you cope in a healthy way with emotions if you don't make these basic distinctions, right? You're going to be handicapped in that regard if you just think of emotion as a kind of vague ball where everything's mashed together. So a good example would be, one of my favorite examples is you're walking through the woods and at night, out of the corner of your eye, you see a snake. And immediately your heart starts beating, your body releases adrenaline. It triggers the fight or flight response, activates your amygdala. 2 seconds later, you look more closely at it and you think that's not a snake. It's a old bit of rope or a rubber hose or something like that. What happens now is that your prefrontal cortex has started to reevaluate your initial impression, and it's noticed that it's inaccurate. So unconsciously, at a neurological level, it sends an inhibitory signal to your amygdala and says, turn off the alarm, like it's a false alarm. Now, the interesting thing is you're still going to be anxious for a while. Your body will stop releasing adrenaline, but it's going to take 10, 20 minutes, whatever, for your body to break down the adrenaline that's already circulating. So it's going to take you a while to restore your composure. Your hands might still be shaking like for 5 or 10 minutes afterwards, right? There's a recovery period. But that's normal. Like, it's normal for our emotions to be triggered rapidly, automatically, but in a fast and loose way. So what we gain from that is a rapid response, but the price we pay for it is that it's imprecise, inaccurate, and leads to a number of false alarms. And there's a tendency to exaggerate threats and underestimate our coping ability. What's supposed to happen is that we then reappraise. Like, when we've got a little bit more time, like, we begin to reappraise our hot take, like our initial impression. And cognitive therapy, in a sense, is just building on that, like doing that in a more sophisticated way. So Stoics understood we need to buy ourselves a little bit more time, ideally at that point. And the easiest way to do that actually is just to tell yourself, slow down, take a moment, like hold your horses, like stop and think. Is your initial impression, is your hot take really accurate? Or might it be slightly distorted? This is, I think, in a way that you could describe that as a sort of mindfulness. The Stoics call it prosoche. It means paying attention. In a sense, this is kind of the first step in almost any type of self-help or psychotherapy, perhaps.
I'm curious because my perception through the lens of modern psychology and also ancient wisdom traditions like Buddhism would ask us similarly to examine the gap between the stimulus and the response, and how our hardwired need for survival makes us vigilant for any perceived threat and stress, and how if I'm going to come to you, Donald, and sling insults your way in English in a way that matches with your own perceived inadequacies that is going to be triggering for you, because in some way you believe on some level, if you're triggered emotionally, on some level that these things are actually true about you. And likewise, from the Buddhist perspective, they ask us and invite us to pay attention to the changes in our biochemistry. Right? There's always an abnormality in the breath and a biochemical sensation that's always coupled with these sanskaras, these old triggers and wounds embedded deep in our mind. And to become a free individual, to wake up to the truth of who we are, we need to begin examining these automatic, algorithmic patterns that are almost enacting in and of themselves. And that is an inherently unconscious way to live life. Of course, it brings compassion into the equation for largely their unconscious processes in which we have no control over. I love that the invitation that you're bringing is to start to give some space and breath into the gap between our opinions about the events and the events in and of themselves.
I think to kind of circle back to where we started with the lowercase stoicism and so on. So people who have that simplistic idea would think the goal is just to kind of eliminate all of their feelings. And that might be an unrealistic goal. So the Stoics would say, no, the goal is to notice, recognize the initial automatic subcortical like threat responses and so on that are just part of human nature, but also just to kind of realize that they're just automatic responses, and the Stoics say you don't actually have to buy into them. The odd thing is it changes our perception, but I would compare it to if you're high on drugs or you're drunk, you just drank a bottle of whiskey. You might think, I feel like I should phone up one of my relatives that I don't get on with and have, tell them what I really think of them, right?
Yeah.
So one person might do that. And another person might think, hang on a minute, I'm drunk. Like, I'm not thinking straight. I can't trust some of these impressions that I have right now. They're kind of distorted. And that's kind of what that self-awareness of somebody who's drunk or high, realizing that they're drunk or high, is the type of self-awareness that the Stoics are talking about. They have a technical term for this. They call these initial automatic phases, they call them the first movements or the proto-passions. Propathei is the term that they use. So those they think are just natural. But the trick is not being swept along by them, but being able to kind of step back from them, like not trying to eliminate them or suppress them, but just accepting that they're natural and realizing that we don't necessarily have to allow them to control us. We can choose what we do next in response to them.